I got a couple of housekeeping things I want to get out of the way here first, and maybe if the doc wants to comment on these, we can. The first is this from another good buddy, a good pal that appears on Podcast by George, and it's Matthew Ho. This is really startling, and Matthew Ho is making the rounds as we speak on media everywhere to talk about this. The North Carolina State Board of Elections voted 3-2 not to certify the Green Party ballot access petition. Matt says we needed 13,865 signatures, and the North Carolina Green Party submitted 15,953 verified signatures. We did everything required, and they just said no. His question is this what democracy looks like? Now get this. He says in the North Carolina State Board of Elections meeting for our lawyer, Oliver Hall, at Voter Choice, he just asked if there is any question about the validity of our nearly 16,000 signatures that had been validated. The board refused to answer the question and muted our lawyer because it was remote, I guess. It was over the phone or whatever. Yeah, they just disconnected the guy's microphone. And of course, I don't know, Doc, this is kind of hardcore politics because what had happened with him, he got that petition. It looked good for the ballot to be on out there in North Carolina. But of course, the Democratic Party realizes that those Green Party people, the anti-war folks and the people that have great sympathy for that, are likely to be Democratic voters if the Green Party isn't on the ballot. So, yeah, they took great exception to this. They started contacting people. They contacted Matt Ho and asked him to step down. He said, hell no, I've got support. I've got my petition signed. I'm submitted. I'm ready to go. I'm going to run. But they started contacting people on the petition, trying to get them to rescind their petition signing. And when that didn't work, it went before this board and they pulled the plug on it. So I guess the question is a good one by Matt Ho. And by the way, we're going to have him on. I'm going to bring him back on in the next couple of days. We're going to talk about length. But the question is this America? And I think this makes American politics today.
Well, the problem is no party, that is not the Democrats nor the Republicans, want anyone running from some third party. The Republicans don't want any conservatives who might take away voters from the Republican Party to run. There are a few conservative small third parties, and the Democrats don't want any party that might be progressive or a little bit liberal, who would definitely appeal to people who think the Democrats are not progressive and not liberal enough. And so I haven't looked at who the members are of this board, but if there were some Democrats on there and some Republicans, they might have just cut a deal and said, we don't want third parties running around here. I don't know if you can litigate it. The Supreme Court is apparently considering giving the states the power to decide how elections are run, regardless of federal law and regardless of law. That was a story that just broke.
Right.
I mean, if the Supreme Court says every state can run their elections however they want, that really undermines the whole idea that we are one country and so on. And it's one more, I think, sign that there is this disintegration going on. There are some states that are pro-choice and they're inviting people to come there for abortions if they need them. Other states are completely shutting those down. I know we're probably talking about some things that were on your list, but certainly the idea that the Supreme Court is going to approve perhaps that you cannot cross a state border to get an abortion. I mean, is that permitted in the Constitution in terms of, due process, interstate commerce, crossing borders? How are you going to enforce it? Set up border police, issue passports? I mean, in Russia, they issued every person basically an internal passport, and you couldn't move to any other city or town unless you had permission, and you had to always carry your passport with you wherever you went. We don't want to go that direction. I mean, people don't, conservatives don't even want, COVID vaccine cards. And so I can't imagine that real conservatives are going to be comfortable with this thing that's going on.
Well, people have got to pay attention. I put it in oversimplified terms, obviously, because I'm a simple man. But every time I hear about the Supreme Court and hear these Congress people talk about states' rights, this is the way I respond, Doc. I say, you realize that if it were up to some states, and they will remain unnamed, black people probably today would not be able to vote in this country. Slavery might be an option in some parts of this country. That's why you can't turn these types of issues back to these states. And you talked about this board out there in North Carolina, and I didn't look into the board members' bios and stuff like that, but here's what happened, and this is no surprise with Matthew Ho. It's a 5-member board. All 3 Democrats voted against his petition for the reason that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And both
I hadn't seen that.
And both Republicans said, "Hell yeah, let him in." Well, why do they want him in? Because they know that he might sink the Democratic candidate's battleship. And of course, from a lefty's perspective like mine, I don't want Republicans, especially in North Carolina, to win. But the idea is maybe somebody like Matthew Ho can get that Democratic Party to make some concessions on key issues like climate, war, and health care that they'll have to support to get his followers between now and the election. And if it were to move forward with him on the ballot, that's a possibility. But if they can eliminate him on a technicality like this, hell, they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to assimilate any of those issues.
That's a wonderful point you're making, because third parties, and when I teach my American government class, I always say, look, third parties rarely win elections. But what they do sometimes is force some other party to adopt policies that they wouldn't otherwise. And that was true of the Democrats. George, the Democratic Party had to adopt some things that the American Socialist Party wanted to pursue, and they always stuck with their themes. When they started winning elections, or at least getting votes before FDR, and the Democrats at that time had to incorporate some of those more progressive or liberal policies into their platform, because they were worried that voters would migrate over to the socialists. And then the Socialist Party declined when the Democrats adopted those. So third parties, Bull Moose and others, sometimes can, influence what the major parties do. I know the problem is that when they do that, the major parties win, and then they figure, well, we won, so we don't have to do any of this stuff. It's hard to be a third party in America, that's for sure. If you want to be a third party, I would suggest move to Israel. Israel is the best place in the world, because in Israel, if you're a third party and you have a few votes in the Knesset, which is their parliament, and they do what you want, you just say, well, I'm leaving. And when you leave, the government collapses, because it's a, parliamentary system where the prime minister doesn't have enough votes in the Knesset. He's got to resign, call new elections, or try to form a new coalition. But in the U.S., third parties have so little influence, actually, and I'm not surprised with the whole question.
Let's and we got so many things to go through today, but I want to again. This is kind of a housekeeping issue. Let's go from the Knesset to let's talk about the Iowa caucuses here very briefly.
Sure.
Oh, not this one. Let me bring this is the one here. Okay, so this is from Radio Iowa. Iowa Democrats are making their case to keep the Iowa caucuses first. I'll get this up big enough to where I can read it. Iowa Democratic Party officials have presented national party leaders with population and election data and a vote-by-mail plan for the 2024 Iowa caucuses, all in hopes of keeping the caucuses first in the nation. Quote, starting this process in Iowa has resulted in our Democratic nominee winning the popular vote in the last 4 presidential elections. Why would we, now popular vote, remember folks, why would we mess with success? That's Scott Brennan, a former Iowa Democratic Party chairman, asked this morning during a presentation in Washington, D.C. This was about a week or so ago. The National Democratic Committee's Rules and Bylaws Committee began hearing presentations from 16 states and Puerto Rico. That's who's in on this thing. All are competing to be among 5 early states to vote as the party selects its next presidential nominee. Jennifer Confirst, who folks have heard on Podcast by George, the Democratic leader in the Iowa House, emphasized the Republican presidential candidates are already appearing in Iowa since the Republican National Committee has decided the Iowa GOP's caucuses will remain first. The Iowa GOP's caucuses will remain first. Okay, let me bring that down off screen because, Doc, this is something that you brought up months ago on this show, and it's
Sure.
kind of bizarre in some ways, but it's this politics type thing. The Republicans may be the ones that salvage the Iowa caucuses for the Democrats. And what I think Confirst is saying there is you folks don't want to give the caucuses to another state because the Republicans are going to come in here, Democrats, and run roughshod over the state of Iowa because they have a caucus first in the nation. Is that the point or not?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, the media is going to come when the Republicans hold the first in the nation caucuses for their presidential nominee. And this time around, it's going to be incredibly competitive, exciting, tension-filled for the Republicans, because the question is Donald Trump going to run, and who is going to run? And Nikki Haley was in Iowa, and Pompeo and others are coming. So the Republican caucuses are going to be really, I think, exciting. And the media is all going to come to Iowa for those caucuses on that cold winter night, when people go and vote. And if the Democrats don't have one, the free media that the Democrats get that's worth, I've heard more than $1 billion worth of free publicity, is not going to be there because there isn't any Democratic caucus going on. Well, they'll have some caucuses, but they won't be, what we normally would have first in the nation. So Iowa's caucuses will take place, but they're not going to be the first in the nation as far as the Democratic Party is concerned. So that's the argument. And, I understand how people, and I've had people in other parts of the country tell me, why should that little state that, is mostly corn, hogs, beans, cattle, and chickens and turkeys be, and John Deere, be the state that, goes first? And the answer is because it's been a great story. It's been sort of the beginning of the presidential campaigns, and Iowa does a good job with the state fair and food on the stick and stuff. That the media loves that kind of stuff. And if we don't, the Democrats don't allow the Democratic Party to have caucuses first with the Republicans, the Democrats are going to pay a price for it. I'm not sure that the National Democratic Committee understands all that. The last time they screwed up our caucuses by forcing some stupid app on us that didn't work, and that meant that we couldn't report the results on caucus night. And if you can't report the results on caucus night, you might as well not have caucuses, because the media leaves and then it takes a month to count the votes. Really? Are you kidding me? So the Democratic National Committee may not fully understand. The Iowa caucuses are, don't mess with tradition is my slogan there.
Well, and that app that you mentioned, I always like to emphasize for folks now, do not forget that shadow app that screwed up our Iowa caucuses when it appeared that Bernie Sanders was about to win it again in 2020. That app was funded by, in the background and revealed much later, the Clintons and Pete Buttigieg. And who was declared with no results finalized in the state of Iowa as the winner? Buttigieg. I mean, I'll just leave it there, but I mean, you got to remember that. Look that up and look into that. Okay, before we leave the caucuses, Docs, now that report that I had here was about a week or so old. I haven't heard much about it since then. Have you heard anything in the ether? Is Iowa going to prevail in your opinion, or it's a toss-up, or where's this at?
Iowa is sort of floating around. I think they're thinking about having maybe 5 states or something like that go first, and some people think that Iowa might still be in that. So it'd be Iowa and, Nevada and New Hampshire, South Carolina and maybe some other state. But I think they haven't made a decision yet. And of course, the caucuses for president are way far away. Presidential caucuses are not going to happen for another couple of years. So we're all excited about an event that, a lot of things could happen between now and then, I guess. I don't know how firm the decision of the DNC is. But I like the Iowa caucuses. I understand the opposite perspective that states with more diverse populations and so on should have them. But as I keep saying, Iowa is pretty diverse. We have every ethnic group in the world somewhere. We have the first mosque in the United States in Cedar Rapids, and we have Czechs and Slovaks, and we have a lot of Latinos, and we have certainly, Vietnamese and other Asian citizens. And so, yes, the numbers may not be high, but it's a pretty diverse state, really. Rural, urban, give us a chance.
Well, and maybe the underlying point is, in the past two go-arounds, the most diversity-friendly candidate did quite well here in Iowa, much to the chagrin of the DNC.
Yeah.
That would be the Bernie. Okay, let me. We got a lot of things to roll through here.
Let's go. Yeah.
Let's get to this next one. I mean, this was an eye-opener. I like to put these things on here. Now, this is according to an AP poll that was just released. Yeah. Most say the nation's on the wrong track, including the Democrats. Oh, this does not look too good. Okay, let's bring this in here. And it says from the Associated Press, Dateline, Washington, an overwhelming and growing majority of Americans say the U.S. is heading in the wrong direction, including nearly 8 in 10 Democrats. 8 in 10, according to a new poll that finds deep pessimism about the economy plaguing President Joe Biden. And the doc has talked about this a lot, the old pocketbook, folks. Remember Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, 85% of U.S. adults say the country is on the wrong track, and 79% describe the economy as poor, according to a new survey from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. The findings suggest Biden faces fundamental challenges as he tries to motivate voters to cast ballots for Democrats in November's midterm elections. Now, Doc talked about how far off 2024 is for the presidential choices, but November is coming up pretty damn quick, folks. Inflation has consistently eclipsed the healthy 3.6% unemployment rate as a focal point for Americans who are dealing with high gasoline and food prices. We all know that. Now, even among the Democrats, 67% call economic conditions poor. Quote, "He's doing the best he can. I can't say he's doing a good job," said Chuck McLean, 74, "but his opposition is so bad. I just don't feel the Democratic Congress is doing enough." I included that quote because I mean that sums up a lot. I mean, that's just one guy's opinion, but take a look at these poll numbers now. Look at this graph. Look at this chart. This was interesting because this is how it breaks down according to political parties. Now, the blue, no matter who, folks, are still in there. They're still supporting Biden at a level of 72%. Look down here at this red line. Oh, my God. These are the Republicans. They never liked him. I mean, they were in there at about 25, 30% when he took office. They're down here at 8%. And then if you look at this midline here, this gray line, I don't know if it's a cursor or not, but that's the 39%. That's what you get when you bring these two groups together. Again, the poll showing only 39% of Americans approved of Biden's leadership overall, while 60% disapprove. His approval rating fell to its lowest point of his presidency last month. Now, these numbers are close to where Trump was in 2017. I can't overstate that enough. These aren't just kind of bad numbers. These are horrific, folks. The Democratic president gets hit even harder on the economy. 69% saying they disapprove of him on that issue. Among Democrats, 43% disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy. That's very significant. That's his base. 43% disapprove of his handling of the economy. And again, why that's so important. That tends to determine who gets elected. It has historically, anyway. The national dissatisfaction is bipartisan, the poll shows. 92% of Republicans, 78% of Democrats say the country is headed in the wrong direction. Since last month, the percentage of Democrats saying the country is headed in the wrong direction rose from 66%. Okay, here's the final page on this, I think. Dorothy Avado, 66, said she voted for Biden in 2020, but plans to switch allegiance this year. Quote, "I'm a Democrat, so I had to vote Democrat, but that's going to change," said the Martin County, North Carolina resident. Now, I don't know what she's talking about there. She's talking about candidates or parties. the candidates may change. Biden may not even run again, but this strikes fear and dread in the heart of the Democratic Party. They don't want him switching parties, folks. So let me take that down off screen and bring the doc in here. The one thing I would say, Doc, is that isn't it kind of traditional at this juncture that presidents hit bottom in their polling numbers about midway through the term?
Yeah, they do. And the thing, of course, I can't do anything about it, is people think that the president can push a bunch of buttons and make the economy better and, click over here and inflation will go away. And, do a little lever on this side and then gas prices go down. Presidents really don't have a lot of power. This is a global economy with fungible things like oil and gas, with a supply chain problem, but Biden had nothing to do with it. I mean, COVID created this enormous backlog of shipments, and then China got into lockdown, and they couldn't manufacture a lot of things, so products became scarce. You can elect, any genius that you want. They won't be able to actually do a lot. Now, Biden and the Democrats did create a problem with inflation, because they spent so much money to try to keep the economy going forward during COVID that it is now, I think, an overheated economy. The thing I would point out, have you watched the news lately? Are people worried and not traveling in their cars? And are people not flying on airplanes because it's all so expensive? No. The roads are jammed, and over this 4th of July weekend, you apparently should have left already. In most parts of the country to get on the road, because it's going to be a driving nightmare. So what's the deal then with gas prices? They're very high, but apparently people are still saying, well, I'm just going to, cut down, buy some cheaper beer and drive, wherever I'm going. Are people still buying food even though it's expensive? Well, yes, they are. I mean, you move things around. I tried buying a tenderloin steak yesterday. Oh man, I gave up on that, because I couldn't go to the bank. It was too late to get a loan.
I heard
and
that
so,
from Chris
so you
Peterson,
don't buy tenderloin steak. So you buy something else, some lower, chuck roast or something that's less expensive, and you have to adapt to it. You can vote out Biden. You can vote Biden out all you want, and that probably will happen. He probably won't run again, as you said. But in the end, whoever is in the White House, if it had been Donald Trump, I don't think he could have done much about the economy, because he couldn't control COVID, China, the whole supply chain issue, the war in Ukraine, and the incredible impact that that's had on gas and oil and gas, gasoline and gas. And so we're in an international crisis of some sort. And yes, it's going to cost, I think it's going to cost the Democrats control of the House and Senate, probably. All these other issues that are exploding all over the media, in the end, sort of are like a fog. They kind of there, and then they go away, and then you're still going to see that economy. Even though, as you pointed out, I mean, employment is at 100% pretty much. I mean, yes, there's a small unemployment and people who don't want to go work. But my goodness, you can't find people to work. I can't find anyone to do anything for me, contractor wise. I mean, they can't find workers. And so what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? We're not sure yet what that means. But, certainly there isn't any lack of demand for people to go work, at the big box stores, the hardware store, wherever. They're all looking for people to work. So why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't the Democrats saying, look, yes, there are these problems, but my goodness, if you want a job right now, you have pretty much your pick of the choice of where to work, except for Tesla, which is laying off a huge number of people.
I saw that too.
Elon.
Again, I tend to oversimplify matters, but I look at it and I think with the changing demography of America and with the retirees that are checking out and the people that just don't want to work in any controlled space because of COVID
Yeah.
and these other issues, we're going to have to embrace and use immigrant populations, folks, to get the kind of contractor work done like the doc's talking about, like it or not. And I got to get my lefty perspective on here. The doc's right. The economy probably was overheated during COVID because of spending from the federal government. But I don't want people, again, that's just my lefty perspective, don't think about that in the terms of these $1,400, $600 stimulus checks that were handed out. I tell people, think of it in terms of the $5 trillion upward movement of wealth unprecedented in world history that went to
Yeah.
these huge corporations in the form of the CARES Act. And the lefty perspective on this now is the economy is overheating because they survived, they thrived. I mean, their profits went up 200, 300, 400% during the pandemic, and they're holding Americans hostage by raising prices when they are floating in money. But again, that's just my little lefty diatribe. And the one thing I would also say, Doc, when it comes to the economy and how this dictates everything and why this is shaping our future, really. It's kind of sad and depressing in some respects because people don't think about anybody but themselves. But I know that goes all the way back to FDR, the economy. But I think about John Kennedy and people like that. I first saw this and became aware of it during the Reagan presidency. I mean, the thing was, vote for us and ask for what you want. I mean, think about yourself. Think about your family. Think about the potholes in the street out in front of your house that you want fixed. And that's how you vote for a leader of the free world. And that kind of has just snowballed. Again, this is a lefty perspective into where we're at today. Well, Doc talked about how Biden's probably going to be running again in 2024. Maybe not. Here, let me bring this up on screen. This is out of CNN. Here we go, Doc. The whispers of Hillary Clinton 2024 have started. Yeah, they're talking about Hillary coming back. Let me move this slide forward here and talk about this. In the immediate aftermath of the Supreme Court's monumental decision to overthrow Roe v. Wade, conservative writer, now this is key, conservative writer John Ellis, this makes me laugh, conservative writer John Ellis took to the internet to make a provocative case. It was time for Hillary Clinton to make another political comeback. I mean, this is a loser any way you look at it. Is this guy serious? If he is, that goes to show you again how conservative the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party is. If he's not serious and he's a Pied Piper or he's a Trojan horse or whatever you want to call it, yeah, they want the Democratic Party to run Hillary because they're going to lose, folks. Now is her moment, he wrote. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade creates the opening for Hillary Clinton to get out of stealth mode and start down the path toward declaring her candidacy for the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination. Again, this is on CNN, folks. Ellis's argument is centered on the ideas that President Joe Biden, who will be 82 shortly after the 2024 election, is simply too old to run again. Ellis is far from the only person making that case. I mean, the majority of the Democratic Party may believe that as well. And two, the Democratic bench is not terribly strong. And he's not the only person eyeing a Clinton re-emergence. I don't know, Doc. What do you make of that? Is that tongue in cheek, or is Hillary coming back? Not to say that she couldn't win the popular vote, but man, I'm telling you, I think that's a loser for the Democrats. I think the same thing is going to happen again. And my God, can you envision a Clinton versus Trump candidacy for 2024?
No, it is remarkable. This morning actually had a chance to talk to a friend of mine who's very savvy, and I mentioned this, and he's a Democrat, and he said, "Oh no," he said, that just isn't going to work. That is not a great idea. Hillary Clinton, is the past. We need to find new blood in the Democratic Party. And I said to him, "Well, who in the Democratic Party do you want to run, if you could?" And he said, "I don't know." So the Democrats have a leadership problem to some extent, although some of the people that have been in Congress have been pretty visible. But I just, right now, it's hard to point and say these are the two people who are presidential quality or character and could go out there and sell themselves for the Democratic Party. I just couldn't pick them for you. And Hillary Clinton is not one of those.
Well,
I think Biden is not either. And Biden is angry because his presidency is being undermined by a lot of Democrats saying, we really don't think that, Joe Biden should run again. And so he's angry about that. But, I mean, and it's the same with Senate candidates, frankly. At what point do you just give in and say, you got to make room for the next generation? We have that in Iowa with Senator Grassley. A lot of people think he should make room for some fresh new Republicans. But once you're in there, you got name recognition. You got a lot of all the things that you need to get renominated and then probably win. But the point is that Hillary Clinton is Bill Clinton might be a good candidate.
It probably would do, but I mean, I just think that that's a guaranteed loser. Let me bring this up on screen.
No.
Now, this is from the left, folks. This is from left of the Democratic Party, but this is from our friends at the Revolutionary Blackout Network, and they polled their followers. This is a poll of about 900 people, which in today's world is a significant poll. What they thought about the presidential candidates for 2024. Now, bear in mind what the doc said. I mean, it's way early, folks, but this is what they had. Harris Buttigieg, 2024, versus Trump DeSantis in 2024. I mean, you can pick any combination of candidates that you want, but look at this. Harris Buttigieg is going to win for sure. 5.4%. These are lefties. These are Democrats, folks. Trump DeSantis for sure. 94.6%. So in other words, my God, do not run those folks because that's what's going to happen. And again, that isn't from a Republican point of view. That's from a Democratic point of view.
Well, let me put it this way. Nowhere in hell will Donald Trump allow DeSantis to be his running mate because DeSantis's popularity ratings are higher than Donald Trump's right now in some polls. And DeSantis is a red meat eating attack dog. He is not going to let even Donald Trump get away with anything. If he were the vice president or the candidate for vice president, he would be pretty tough. And if he runs against Donald Trump, which is, one speculation is that may end up happening. I wouldn't dismiss the fact that DeSantis, could beat him. I think that the Republican 2024 primaries, and if there are caucuses, their own caucuses are not popular anymore. There are hardly any left, if any, except for the Iowa one. But I think it's going to be a fascinating race because there are a lot of Republicans showing some interest, and Donald Trump is going to have to, compete with them. Of course, he did that during the debates that we want to forget when Donald Trump and all those Republicans were up there, little Marco and all the ones that were trashed by Trump. So it's going to be interesting. I think the Democrats may unearth some good candidates and start having them go out and basically give speeches and stuff, because a lot of them really don't think that Joe Biden is reelectable. But that's where we are right now. It's the gerontocracy, man.
Well, and I'm so exasperated and depressed, and I don't drink anymore, but if I did, maybe this would be the cause. I look at it and I think, my God, maybe they need to do something totally different. I mean, step out of the political sphere and nominate an actor, nominate a musician, somebody like, well, hell, that can't work. Well, just a minute. The Republicans did it with Reagan, for Christ's sake. He was a B actor, basically. Starred with a monkey in some movies. He was a cowboy actor. I mean, he's one of the most famous presidents in American history. Trump was a game show host. I mean, The Apprentice. I mean, it worked for the Republicans. Why don't the Democrats consider stepping outside of their political sphere and nominating, I don't know, Matthew McConaughey looked pretty good to me. Hell, compared to Hillary Clinton, he does anyway. Or, pick The Rock or Bruce Springsteen or, I don't know, somebody like that. And, Doc, just talking about Hollywood movies, I'm a fan of movies like everybody is. One of my favorites is a hockey movie. No surprise there, Slapshot. And there's a line in there about he don't run with the traffic. And, that's kind of the way that I am, too. I don't run with the traffic. You talked about Donald Trump. I'm looking at these January 6th hearings, and I'm thinking to myself, this does not look good for Trump. Something may actually become of this. I didn't think so going in, but I'm looking at the amount of viewers that they're getting, and it is substantial. And the point that I made on an earlier podcast is that Americans frame their history and maybe even their present from Hollywood, from movies. That's how they get their understanding of history. And people are looking at this January 6th thing, and it's being produced by Hollywood people. They've got this young, beautiful woman, 25 years old, telling these torrid tales and this whispery voice. And I'm telling you something, folks, this may actually work because that's America. I mean, that's how we formulate our opinions. And then the other angle that I have that I haven't heard people talk about a lot, the downside to this is, it may work. The other side of it is, if it does work to any extent at all, Trump's going to run again. Hell, he's got to run again to get himself in the White House, maybe to pardon himself. So let me bring this up on screen. Let's talk about this a little bit. This is out of the Nation and World section of the USA Today. This is about the January 6th hearings. These circles are mine. The January 6th hearing, fueling the burning question, did Trump commit a crime? Well, okay, maybe he did, but the real question is not that at all in my mind. My question is, will it make any difference? Because just back up and consider this, folks. The majority of Americans, I think it is the majority of Americans at one time or another in their lifetime will commit a crime, a federal crime, in their tax filings. they lied. I mean, I don't know if simply committing a crime, particularly a lesser crime, in the minds of Republicans in particular, not in the minds of Democrats, but in the Republicans, are enough to make a difference here. Let me bring this up on screen and read through this a little bit. From the Associated Press, about half of Americans believe former President Donald Trump should be charged with a crime for his role in the U.S. Capitol attack on January 6, 2021, a new poll shows. The survey from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs, same poll that we had up earlier, finds that 48% of U.S. adults say the Republican former president should be charged with a crime for his role, while 31% say he should not be charged. An additional 20% say they don't know enough to have an opinion, and those people probably never will. That's kind of my experience with this. I mean, that's the see no evil, hear no evil. I don't know. I'm watching Dancing with the Stars. Don't bother me. That's who that crowd is. 58% say Trump bears a great deal or quite a bit of responsibility for what happened that day. The poll was conducted after 5 public hearings by the House Committee investigating January 6th, which has sought to paint Trump's potential criminal culpability in the events that led to deadly insurrection. Deadly insurrection. It's not a minor thing, folks. But it was taken before Tuesday's surprise hearing featuring former Trump White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson. And I mean, she is spellbinding. I mean, I'm looking into this. Number one, I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, God, it's a beautiful woman. I can't help it. I mean, and she's only 25 years old and she's in front of these television lights and God, is she composed and God, is she a good storyteller? Well, folks, there's some bad news to all of that. And that is what you're seeing there, even though it's presented like a trial. And you think that you're watching O.J. Simpson or something like that. You're not. You're watching a hearing. Hearsay is allowed. A lot of what you're hearing and seeing from her is hearsay. It's third-hand stuff. And she's recounting it in great, lurid detail. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking to myself, Doc, okay, she heard this secondhand. Did the first-hand person explain it to her in this detail? That's kind of weird. People don't usually get all hushed voice and as conspiratorial as she's recounting this. That's what I'm thinking while I'm watching this. Well, here's Peter Alexander from NBC. A source close to the Secret Service tells me Bobby Engel, the lead agent and the presidential limousine SUV driver, are prepared to testify under oath that neither man was assaulted and that Mr. Trump never lunged for the steering wheel. And for people that are watching the hearings, you know how significant that is. That's the bombshell, really, that she dropped in the middle of these hearings. Alexander continues. He says, Anthony Guglielmi tells me the agents in Trump's presidential SUV are available to testify under oath, responding to Hutchinson's new allegations. And then a source close to the Secret Service says both men dispute that Trump grabbed the steering wheel or assaulted an agent. They do not deny that Trump was irate and demanded they drive to the Capitol. Okay, so I get that, but that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, Doc. She appears to be, an actress to a certain extent. But again, remember what I said about the movies and history and stuff like that. That's exactly what they want. This is going to formulate public opinion. Maybe it will make the difference because of that. But you got to remember, to a certain extent, it is acting.
Well, it is, and I think those hearings are watched certainly by people who already have a certain opinion of what happened in Congress, in Congress as the attacks occurred and who was responsible. Those who believe that it's all just made up and overblown, they're not watching those hearings. So she's not influencing a whole big segment of American society with her, testimony. And so to some extent, we in America and the media especially love the he said, she said. And that's what we got here. We got a he said, she said. She said this, and then Donald Trump said, no, that's not true. And so unless you have a smoking gun video, actual hard evidence that you can put on the table in the courtroom, it's difficult to convince people what the truth is. And we saw that recently with a spectacular trial in which he said and she said he was abusive, and he said, oh, I never touched anyone. And that was one of the most Hollywood scripted trials I've ever seen, the Johnny Depp trial. And so Americans are kind of used to seeing this, he said, she said, and then they make up their mind. Obviously a lot of people had made up their mind that Johnny Depp was not guilty long, testing all over and marching around and all that. And, to some extent, the end of this particular saga may end up being that way. It's hard to imagine, though, that, an attack on the center of U.S. government, which to some extent is the Congress, although the White House is the other one, would not make people think twice. And then somebody told me the other day, the Black Lives Matter people, they were pretty seriously close to attacking the White House. And the White House had to put up tremendous security and an extra fence, and they had to bring in, all kinds of military and be ready to drop stuff from helicopters because the crowds were really big, and there was fear that they might broach the White House. And I pointed out that they never did broach the White House, and that for the most part, they weren't carrying any weapons or anything.
Well, yeah, they didn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. But you people say, well, there are comparable things going on, and Antifa is out there in Portland, Oregon, burning down buildings and attacking the police station and doing stuff. And so the country is in a tremendous crisis mode. The hearings were fascinating, and they will go down in history as an interesting example of government, trying to essentially dig out the truth and defend itself. But we'll move on from that. And you mentioned earlier it's the economy, stupid, and the hearings were not about the economy.
Well, And I want to say this, when I'm looking at this too, and I thought going in that nobody's going to watch this, nobody's going to care. Well, actually, a lot of people are watching it. A lot of people do seem to care. And the point that I made
Yeah,
was, well, they're not going to deal with anything significant here. But remember, what brought down Richard Nixon's presidency and may bring down the ascendancy again of Donald Trump, what brought down Nixon wasn't the Vietnam War. It wasn't the illegal invasion of Laos and Cambodia. It was a break-in at Watergate in a hotel, a seemingly small, insignificant nick in the electoral process that was seen on national television. That brought him down. To go back to what I was talking about earlier with this young woman talking about Trump grabbing the steering wheel and assaulting a Secret Service agent, you think that hell that's much to do about nothing? Nah, wait a minute.
yeah.
It might be a lot to do about everything. And talking about everything here, and now we're running out of time. I want to bring this up on
No, I
screen.
agree with you. And yeah, no, I agree with you,
Yeah.
George. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of it.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I didn't think
Yeah.
so. Okay. So,
Yeah.
let me bring this up on screen because, okay, so this is, if you've hung around this long, folks, and we've had a lot of great comments from viewers that I've been putting up on the screen, but I mean, I started off by talking about it's getting weird out there, folks. I mean, this thing's about to boil over. The doc's been teaching in these classrooms for 50 years. He'll be the first one to tell you he ain't seen nothing like this. And here to get a perspective on it, a letter to the editor in the venerable Des Moines Register. This is by a guy named Ivan T. Weber. Let me bring this up on screen here. America's only choice is to start over. Ivan writes, we live in a country where money is equated with speech and the rich openly buy political power, where the House of Representatives is gerrymandered and the districts are so large that they make a mockery of the word representative, where 19% of the people elect a majority of the Senate, and where in that body a majority of the population can be and is outvoted every day. That would be you and me, folks. I mean, what we want is not what prevails. That is not what carries the day in the U.S. Senate. He writes, when we irrationally mix the functions of head government and head of state in a presidency selected by a system that does not reflect the will of a majority of the people, that would be the popular vote that he's talking about, and where politically appointed justices of the Supreme Court, a majority of whom were appointed by presidents who did not win the popular vote. Now think about that. The majority of the current sitting U.S. Supreme Court justices were appointed by presidents who did not represent the population, did not win the popular vote, can and have eroded our rights and freedoms while they sit for life without themselves being subject to review. We live in a nation of perpetual minority rule. There is no reason to call the United States a democracy. It fails every test of democracy. It is beyond reform. Indeed, the barriers to constitutional reform are so immense that we cannot amend our Constitution to create a democracy. The system is broken beyond repair. We need to refocus our energies on the creation of a new, modern, and democratic national government. Difficult as it is, there is in reality no other option. It is time to start the discussion to frame a new governmental system. Okay, now this guy's not a QAnon wacko. He's not a nut out of the woodwork here. He's not talking about taking up arms and civil war and all that kind of crap. I don't want to pretend to put that up here. This is Ivan T. Weber. I mean, this is a considered, well-written letter here. And what this guy is talking about is a redo. But Doc, and I talk about the fact that I've got this book, off of my left side of yours, American Government and Politics Today. I mean, I'm looking through this thing and I'm trying to figure out, Doc, is there any, I mean, if we wanted to do a redo, could we find our way? How the hell would it be done? Is there a solution to what this guy's talking about?
I think you probably are underestimating the role of revolution in changing regimes and bringing about new forms of government. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes it's good, and oftentimes it's not good. But, once a system has such vested interests and political parties and businesses and interest groups and lobbies and others have a stake in preserving, the way this thing works. And, modest income people, working class people, people who are working 2 or 3 jobs, they don't really have time to change the system, even though they might want to change the system. It's very, very difficult. Systemic change is very difficult. I think I would also suggest that Donald Trump represented a sort of revolution against the status quo. Donald Trump shook up a lot of things by nominating the Supreme Court that we have now. It is almost revolutionary without violence on the part of the court, a judicial revolution. The states are certainly engaging in what you could call transformational change. A lot of states are doing stuff that, man, that didn't happen and wasn't the way we've done it before on all kinds of issues. You may not agree with what they're doing, but it's happening. So there is a lot of transformation going on. And Ivan, I don't know Ivan, but the letter was interesting, is not considering the fact that if change were to come, it could make things worse for his perspective and maybe better for other perspectives. We always think that change is going to be in our direction, and change very often is not in our direction. It goes cattywampus over there in some new direction that we go, oh my God, what is happening here? Donald Trump was, to some extent, a revolutionary, because he shook up things. He smacked a lot of interests and groups and offended, NATO and offended everybody else, and slapped tariffs on the Chinese because they were misbehaving, which is something nobody had done effectively. Sometimes that's what happens. The Democrats have not done that since FDR. FDR was the other revolutionary. He changed a lot in the way the American system performed and what it did and what its priorities were. And so sometimes change occurs sort of without us noticing that it's changing pretty rapidly. But to, have a constitutional convention, write a new constitution, create a new government that is based on majority vote for president and so on. Yes, but we might end up with the Articles of Confederation. That's what I'm thinking. Right now, I'm thinking the Articles of Confederation would actually work pretty well, because states are becoming more and more unique and different from each other, rather than similar and unified under a kind of an American vision of what things should be like. California and Alabama don't have that much in common.
Well, that didn't scare the bejabbers out of you. What I'm going to bring up next, Will, because the doc was talking about Donald Trump. I don't know what he's reflective of. Nothing good as far as I'm concerned. But here's the other part of it. Chris Hedges, the guy that I follow that is great. I mean, the Pulitzer Prize winning author, the former war correspondent for the New York Times. I mean, go to Substack and check out Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges says that Donald Trump really is reflective, and this Roe v. Wade is a further extension of what's been coming down the tracks in America for some time that we're not being told about, that he's been sounding the alarm bell about for, I don't know, a decade at least, maybe longer. Here's the Substack article. Go to Substack and check out the Chris Hedges report. He writes, "Fascists in our midst. The Supreme Court rulings, including the overturning of Roe v. Wade, herald the ascendancy of Christian fascism in the United States." He says, blow by blow, the autocratic power is being solidified by this monstrous Christian fascism, which is bankrolled by the most retrograde forces of corporate capitalism. That would be Citizens United as an example, folks. It looks set to take control of the U.S. Congress in the midterm elections. Now, what he has been warning about for some time, Doc was talking about Trump. Chris Hedges says, okay, hang on to your seat. If Trump or a Trump-like clone is elected in 2024, and I mean, right now, folks, you could say it's a coin toss. He says if that happens, what is left of our democracy will likely be extinguished. Now, that's just one paragraph out of this article, but I want to encourage people to go back and take a look at that. I mean, that's what this guy's talking about, Christian fascism. And he cites a litany of things that have occurred. Roe v. Wade, just the most recent, which reinforce that perspective, Doc.
Revolution for sure, and as I said, there are a lot of people who have a whether you call it fascism or faith and religion or whatever, who have a certain view of what's right and what's wrong, and we are used to a certain segment of American culture and society determining what is right and wrong. Okay, and that's been the Warren Court and so on moving forward. But when you look at American history and American politics, abortion was illegal at one point, and that was the norm. Sodomy was illegal, and gay marriage or gay rights was, a dream. I mean, people could get fired from the military, from their jobs and other things if they were discovered to be homosexual. And so you got to remember that we've been there before. And we didn't call it fascism then when abortion was illegal and sodomy was illegal and all kinds of other things. Women didn't have the right to vote at one time. And so, things move back and forth. And we would like things to move in one direction, the direction that we prefer. And that probably most of the folks who are watching and listening to your podcast would like it to go. But there are also enormous segments of American society that are very, very uncomfortable with that, very unhappy with what was happening for the last 50 years or so, and are, happy that things are moving in a direction that they're more comfortable with. You can't just dismiss all those people, because if you do, you're essentially underestimating the extent to which you need to find a way to include them somehow in American society. I mean, Germany collapsed because that wasn't happening there. And we don't want to collapse. We want to make sure that we try to incorporate as many people who will feel that the system has legitimacy. And that's really tough to do. It worked for a while, but now it's crumbling apart. And now somebody has to come up with a solution on how to do that. And certainly there are victims when change happens. There are people who are losers. And in this case, women who need abortions for healthcare reasons or other reasons look like they're going to be losers here, at least in the short run. And those who believe that life begins at conception are the winners. There are always winners and losers in politics. Don't forget that, yo.
Yeah. We could all be losing. So Chris Hedges, I'm listening to the doc talk. What the point that he would be making is the doc's been teaching in university classrooms for 5 decades, 50 plus years, folks. That's where people learned about American politics. Well, if this movement continues, Chris Hedges would say, you're not going to be learning about politics from folks like Steffen W. Schmidt. You're going to be learning about it from a religious leader. I mean, that's kind of where we're headed. And he's citing Roe v. Wade as just one more example of that. Well, Coach, Doc, we're out of time.
Yep, I'm not that pessimistic, but
yeah,
that is, they're optimistic, pessimistic, and realistic, which is my position. When I taught my classes, George, I left it wide open for people to basically, make up their minds. I gave them the information they needed. I never preached politically, even though I have certain views, because I think that what you do is teach people to think for themselves. And some of them were very conservative, and some of them were super duper liberal. And I'm very pleased that I did that. And
he never, Doc always lets me make my points. He says, very good point from your perspective. So that's great. Doc, we got anything in closing here? You got a quick closer for us, because we're out of time.
Well, I think that people have to try and find that little bit of sunshine in those dark clouds, and see how we can get through this, and not let what's happening essentially crush us, defeat us, turn us into depressed pessimists, But instead, what is the solution to all this? We know there are huge, huge disagreements. So if that's the case, that's what we work with. That's the material that we have. If you don't have, concrete and cinder blocks, how are you going to build a house? Well, there are other ways to build it. And I think we need to look for those other ways to keep this house together.
Yeah, just don't build it out of straw. Folks, I just love having this guy on the show. I want to thank him
Even
again.
straw is okay.
Thanks again for coming on another podcast by George LiveLine. Folks, that's Dr. Politics. Let's go ahead and do our little close here. The thing, again, that I want to encourage everybody to do, and I thought this was a great show. If you agree, if you like this, go to podcastbygeorge.com, pick a platform, choose YouTube and Facebook if you want to watch the videos. And if you want to get the audio-only podcast to listen, on your phone or in your car or whatever the case might be, go to Podcast by George and select iTunes or Spotify or the iHeartRadio app or Deezer. There's some things, I mean, Amazon Prime is even on there where you can get audio versions of the podcast. But that's going to do it for today. I want to thank everybody for participating, particularly. Those comments were great that were up on screen. Go to the videos. You'll be able to check those out. And, of course, again, thanks for watching, as always. That's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.